I got a new air gun, guys. New to me, anyway. This is an old Benjamin pumper, 22 caliber. No, it's not a 312, but it's a 342, and it was made in 1968, which was the transitional year where Benjamin was replacing the 312 with the 342. And it is basically it is a 312, but with a different safety. You know, they changed the 342 over the years, but in 68, which was its introductory year, it's, like I said, it replaced the 312, and the reason was because the 312 had the safety was a poor design, and the safety was on the side here on the 312, and it had a tendency to break and to not work well once it got some wear on it, even if it wasn't broken. And they replaced it with this safety, which it's got to be cocked to put it on safe, and it's not cocked. So, but when it's cocked, you can pull this steel piece back and it blocks the trigger. Push it forward to fire. Other than that, this is basically a 312. It's the same, you know, it's got the Tootsie Roll forearm and so on, and it's cosmetically in pretty good condition. Now for the bad thing. See, I bought this on Gunbroker, and I'm not going to say the name of the seller, but I will tell you that he takes the name of a well-known Swedish manufacturer of chainsaws, motorcycles, and rifles. So that should tell you something. But like I said, I'm not going to come right out and say his name, and the reason is because he misrepresented this gun to me. And I didn't pay an insanely high price for it. I wouldn't, you know, I think you guys know me well enough to know that I wouldn't overpay for something. But the price I did pay, which he had it listed as, he had a buy it now price of $175, which is top dollar for an early 342, or any 342 really. But it's top dollar for one that's you know, in perfect working condition. And he represented it as being, he said the words he used were holds and shoots hard. Okay, now to me that means that you know, it shoots, it's got power and it's usable. And unfortunately that's not the case. Also, I'll mention, and this is nitpicking, but because, you know, the shipping wasn't terrible on it, but he did make a profit on the shipping. In fact, he charged twice what the shipping actually cost him, which I can totally understand, covering your costs of taking it to the post office or whatever, because it costs money and it takes time, and you know, and you put time and effort into it, and then you take it to the post office and so on. But I'll just say that he made a pretty good wage on the time he spent in packaging it and sending it to the post office. Now, he did package it well, I'll give him that. And he sent it quickly. Give him that too. But like I said, he made a profit on the shipping, and I wouldn't have a problem with that if he had not misrepresented it. If he had priced it accordingly. You know, if this had been no more than $75 and said it's going to need some work, it shoots but not well, and so it's going to need, you know, it's going to need to be rebuilt, tuned, or whatever. Let me draw your attention to this. I don't know how well you can see the pins, but they have been pounded out and back in, and not by someone who really knows what they're doing either. I don't know if it was the guy who sold it to me who did this, but I mean, it was, in other words, it's been apart. It's been apart apparently fairly recently, because there's no patina on the hammer marks, and there's hammer marks on the tube as well as on the pins on both sides. So it's been apart by someone who didn't know what they were doing. And they also didn't know, another thing that tells me they didn't know what they're doing is because the pump, the piston, is not adjusted properly. Now these have an adjustable piston in them, unlike the later ones, and it's not adjusted properly. So it does hold air, but here's what it does, and this is a common problem. I know how to fix it, but I'm going to have to go into it. I'm going to have to disassemble this thing completely and go into it and work on it. And the fact that it holds air is of no consequence, because if I'm going into it, I might as well go ahead and replace the seals while I'm in there. So it's going to be a complete rebuild and tuning that I'm going to have to do, because it's not shootable as it is. I mean, it will expel a pellet, but these, the 312s and early 342s, unlike the later ones, I think they were rated to 10 pumps, where the later ones, the later 342s and 347s, the 392s and 397s, and the Sheridans, which Benjamin and Sheridan later became the same entity, all call for 8 pumps maximum. These, as I said, I believe they called for 10 pumps maximum. Let me pause right here before the camera shuts off. What it does is, if I pump it up 8 pumps, which I haven't tested it much, I've tried a couple of shots at 5 pumps, and then a couple of shots at 8 pumps. And if I pump it 8 pumps, when I shoot it, I feel a puff of air on my forehead, which means this is not sealing. The bolt is not sealing. And I don't think that it's leaking around the barrel to tube junction. I hope it's not, because if it is, it'll have to go off and be resoldered, probably. I don't know. I might try my hand at resoldering it if necessary, but I hope it's not necessary. But bottom line is, for what I gave for this thing, I don't feel like I can send it off to Baker air guns, or certainly not to Mac 1 air guns, to be rebuilt, because I'll have more money in it than it's worth if I do that. And I have lots of projects, but looks like this is going to be another project for me, and it shouldn't take too long for me to rebuild it. And I have the tool and everything, but I really was hoping to be able to shoot this thing, and it's not shootable. As I was saying though, I get a puff of air. If I pump it 8 strokes, when I shoot it I get a puff of air on my forehead, and the pellet is so weak that it'll just about bounce off a paper target. I mean, it has no power. And then if I cock it and shoot it again, it still has air in it. And in fact, it seems like it has more power on the second shot than on the first. Which stands to reason, because what happens is there's a comb spring in here that gets out of adjustment to where it's not, you know, like all air guns, it's a balance between the hammer spring and the valve spring. and that cone spring is the valve spring. And it gets too powerful somehow. I don't know how it happens, but I've read about this problem with these old Benjamins like this. That the spring gets stronger or something, apparently, according to what I've read. And so the hammer, it goes into partial valve lock because the hammer spring no longer has enough power to crack it open as much as it should. And if it were just, you know, the hammer spring, and I might try just lengthening the hammer spring a little bit and see if that fixes it. If it were just that, I wouldn't have to take the valve apart. But anyway, it goes into partial valve lock, so it only dumps a little bit of air. Okay, so now once it's dumped a partial shot of air, there's less pressure in there for the hammer to work against, so it's able to dump the rest of it on the second shot. Actually, it dumps most of the rest of it, and then there's still a little bit of air remaining for a third shot, but not enough to expel the pellet. With further testing, I would probably find that at some point 4 pumps, 5 pumps, 3 pumps, somewhere in that neighborhood, it would probably dump all the air and probably have about as much power as it should have at that number of pumps, except that the piston is maladjusted. And I can also tell because there's a lot of headspace between the piston and the valve, is when I pump it and then allow the handle to open on its own, air actually puffs out. What happens with my other pumpers is when I pull it back up, when I pull the pump handle back up, I can hear it suck air in. It should not puff air out. If it's puffing air out, it's got a lot of headspace. And I can tell by the way the pump handle feels and sounds and everything. Anyway, so bottom line is I'm going to have to take this thing completely apart and rework it to make it to where it's even shootable. So there you have it. It is a nice little air gun. I really like it. It was made in 1968, and I believe it'll end up being a good one for me, but I certainly wasn't expecting, based on what the seller wrote about it, to have to tear it down and rebuild it before I could use it. But that's the way it is, Buyer beware.